4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and start our meeting. And this is the meeting to set the agenda for the May 1st, 2018 Board of Directors meeting. As you'll notice, the first item that we'll do at that meeting, we'll have a presentation about International Building Safety Month. So if you would take a few moments, we have 6 items on the consent agenda. And if you would review those, and if you have a question, then we will try to get you some answers. Director Hines.
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor. Bruce, on item 6, or item 5, it's another. I guess I'm getting a little confused, and maybe I need to reference our ordinance our Complete Streets policy in ordinance 21,029. Didn't we just do a grant authorization last week? Maybe I'm confused.
Sure. Let me ask Mr. Honeywell, our Public Works Director, to come forward.
Vice Mayor, board members, Director Hines, the one that y'all voted on last week was an application for a grant for this same item. This is a grant that we've already received to go towards this process from MetroPlan. It's a different funding source. So this is a resolution that allows the city or the city manager to accept that award. The one that y'all did last week is a second application. You have to have a resolution before you can apply for the one we did last week.
So, what's our match on this one? 10,000?
It's a $50,000 award, so it's 10,000 match. Yes.
Okay, and this is the CARTS transportation, right?
This one is through MetroPlan. It's TAP funds that MetroPlan has.
All right. So here's a question. So, and it's been a couple of years since when we passed our Complete Streets ordinance, it was ranked. We got some national ranking on it. I thought that's all we had to do when we passed it, and now we're talking about completely revamping our master street plan. I thought the Complete Streets ordinance ran in concurrence with our master street plan.
It does, but the way our master street plan is currently, the maps and what's designated on the master street plan, specifically when it comes to the bike master plan, is what we're talking about. Going back and reviewing and modifying to make it something that's actually infrastructure that can be implemented as we do projects throughout the city. Right now, our bike master plan, some of the locations that are shown to have either bike lanes or separated trails are really infeasible to be able to build those because of the existing conditions of the road. If we resurface a road that shows to have bike lanes on it, but it's only 27 feet wide, there's not enough room to incorporate bike lanes and have vehicular traffic in 2 directions on that. So we want to go in and clean up that actual bike master plan to remove those locations that are not feasible to implement based on our Complete Streets ordinance, and create a map, an outline, a roadmap for us to use in the future that is feasible. It's something that we can do. So we'll be revisiting stuff across the entire city to make sure what's shown on the bike master plan is something that we can implement.
Okay. Well, because what I thought the other grant we applied for was to add the complete street. It didn't only cover bicycle; it covered everything. And
part of that is Complete Streets. You know, it's not just cars. It's mass transit. It's bicycles. It's pedestrian. But the biggest issue we have with our existing master street plan is with that bike master plan map that's in there and where it shows to put that kind of infrastructure throughout the city.
Okay, and we don't have anybody. We're going to have to go out of our area to find somebody to do this. That was the other question.
It'll be a consultant that we hire to help us review that entire.
And I guess what I'm confused at is we started with. So our Complete Streets, that was just the first step.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so so this new plan that we're working on with this grant, you're saying is going to work to effectively marry the actual bike Take the
Master-
bike master plan and match it to what we can actually do, not just lines drawn on a.
Yes, sir, that's the major impetus of what we're trying to do with this grant.
So here's the other question, because the road to, we know where down south is paved with good intentions. We sit here going out for our public hearings on all this stuff. What's the actual cost of implementing this new complete street plan citywide going to cost? I mean, because what we were told when we passed the complete street, it's just going to be some relining the roads and some stuff. But if we're completely changing our master street plan, then that means any developer coming, and what I'm getting at is this can have long-lasting effects on being able to build affordable housing, not driving up input costs for developers and the city on top of it. I mean, we're going to be bound by our own plan. So what I'm talking about is, it's great that we have this plan, but what's it going to cost? Do we even know what it's going to cost? Because to get all the benefits of all the plans I've seen, it's got to be fully implemented. And and there's a difference between having a plan and the cost of implementing and getting full implementation to get all the benefits from that plan.
Right now, we have an existing plan that the Complete Streets Ordinance references. So we have a plan right now that we should be building to.
Okay.
We found instances where we can't build to that plan
Okay.
because it's not feasible to do it. So what we're trying to do is make it a plan that removes the stuff that you can't do. So we're not adding cost beyond what's already out there in existence with the plans we have. We're actually probably going to reduce that impact because we're going to change probably the number of lines that are on the map.
Okay. Because basically going into what you're saying is if we've got an existing street that we can't bring into compliance,
We
either
aren't going to
be-
keep that on the map.
Okay.
We're going
All
to
right.
look for other corridors or streets or areas that we can implement that kind of infrastructure that can actually be done.
And I guess here's a question for Bruce. If we get to the end of this stuff with these grants and we decide not to replace the existing master street plan, do we have to give any of this money back? I mean, and I know we always talk about these grants and it's free money, but we're having to put on, if we get the grant that we applied for last week plus this 10,000, we're talking $50,000 or $60,000 coming, and it's coming out of Public Works Street Fund. So that's the things I have to explain to my constituents when I go out is when we tell them we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do. And they say, well, why are you spending money on these grants to do this stuff if you don't even know if you have money to implement those plans? And that's it. So what's the status on that, Bruce?
Dr. Hines, obviously, when we do try to be aggressive on going after federal dollars, but we also look at the implications and any potential outcomes. So that's a discussion that we do have internally. What are the downsides? It's almost like when you apply for the SAFER grant or the COPS grant, you get the money for 3 years, but then you got to figure out a way to pay for them going forward. So that is an analysis that I do, and I do with our finance and the department. So it is something we sort of keep track of. And again, I think what we heard over and over was, well, you just can't even do this with this street. So let's take it off the plan.
Okay. Well, and as long as that's going into the calculus we're using, because I think before we implement something, is this consultant going to give us, we're going to get some price tags on what we think? Because, from a planning standpoint and everything I've read on this stuff is all of the blue skies based on full implementation, but nobody talks about what full implementation costs. And if the benefits are so great and we've got to get to full implementation, what's our plan to get there? Because it's not going to be done in a year. We're talking about a citywide plan on our 124 square mile city. And John and I were talking before this, and, most of what the concerns I hear from folks in my neighborhood that cycle is just being able to connect from their neighborhood to where most of them have to load up their bicycle and drive to Three Rivers or where they're going to go ride their bike. And what they're more concerned about is not bicycle trails everywhere, but just being able to connect on their bicycle from our neighborhood safely to where those trails start. So as long as we're going to come up with a price tag and if that's something that our community decides we want to do, then we got to figure out when we're going to start paying for it.
Well, and I want to say that this plan is just that. It's a plan. It's not a required implementation, you have to do it in a certain time frame. We're setting out that connectivity that you're referring to across the city. So when we do projects that we've decided to fund, we can refer to this plan and say, okay, in this corridor, we need to implement bike lanes or whatever it happens to be as part of this project. It's what we use as a reference when we're actually going to do a project. It doesn't tell us we have to do these projects in a certain time frame. I want to emphasize that. It's not something that's going to say 5 years from now you have to implement this entire plan.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Director Adcock?
Bruce, can you send me a copy of ordinance 21,029 that we passed in 2015? Some of my fellow board, it'd be good for me to refresh what we actually passed on to what we're dealing with. Thank you.
John, on item 3, I would like to know about each one of these eminent domains. What have we done to try to not have to do eminent domains on each one of these 3 locations?
We have done attempts to contact the property owners by mail and also by phone and also personal visits to the addresses. So we've made multiple attempts over a long period of time.
One of these, I think, is a new addition, or a fairly new addition. So why did we not get the right-of-way whenever that was built? Why are we going after it now?
Can you tell me which one that?
The middle one, Chateau Lane. Chateau Lane.
Chateaus?
Uh-huh.
Those are actually easements that we're trying to acquire from property owners. That project entails doing drainage work in the backyards where you have backyards butting up against each other. Where they've all built fences where you have a fence line across the back. We're trying to get access, and that's the low spot behind all the houses. We're trying to put infrastructure in to drain water that stands in those areas. And we have several homeowners in that neighborhood that do not want to provide us with the easements to be able to gain access to that to do the project.
Okay, this is not 3 eminent domains. How many people are we talking about on these 3 locations?
I have a list here that I'll be happy to provide y'all with a copy of, the actual properties that we're dealing with, but there's 8 total properties that we're talking about
And
between the 3 projects.
How many are there on Woodson and each of the other 2?
Woodson, there's 4 on Woodson, 3 on Chateaus, and 1 on Timberland.
Okay, I would like for this to be kept separate.
Okay, thank you.
Do they know that this is before the city board?
I can find out on that. I don't know for sure.
Has a notice been sent that says that the city board is looking at eminent domain on these, on the date of?
I'm sure I will check on
Yeah.
that to make sure. But when we speak with them, they know that that's always an option that is available on the table.
I know.
They aren't told that, but I don't know if they've necessarily been told.
They
that
may
it's
know
going
it's an option, but I would like for them to know for sure that we are looking at this, because this is a serious thing to do to a property owner. And I would like to make sure that they know that we're taking this step.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director Richardson?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. John, back on that issue, we're not talking about taking the whole property. We're talking about taking easements, right? We're not talking about taking full property.
No, sir. It's either a strip of property along the frontage for road construction, or it's the drainage type work we're doing.
And that's
in yards.
necessary for us to have our operation, necessary for us to make sure we have a fully operational area in terms of drainage and everything else we need to make sure that area is fully functional.
Yes, sir. It will allow us to perform and construct the infrastructure projects that have been approved by the board.
Been approved by us.
That's part of these projects, is gaining access to this property to do the improvements.
Excuse me, Bruce, on number 5, that we, for the most part, we don't just go get money because money is out there. We do a thorough assessment on whether or not we can utilize the money and operationalize the money for what we intended the money to help us with, correct?
That's correct. In fact, we put something in place that there's actually a form that each department has to fill out before they can even apply, that goes first to grants and then to Sarah and then to me. There's this infamous story where the former grant coordinator went to one of my predecessors and said, "Oh, we can get 2 helicopters for $10,000. and he signed off, and they ended up costing us about 500,000. So,
Right.
so yeah, we've got something in place to ensure that.
So there's a thorough assessment and analysis internally
Right.
before we go get these funds. So, I mean, like with respect to Metro Plan, and when we get those kinds of funding sources, do we utilize this process to bring it before us to get a resolution to approve it, or is that for any grants we go see?
It's a requirement,
a
especially
requirement.
federal grants that require the governing body to act.
And so the assumption is that when we got the funding from Metro Plan, which I don't think with the Jumpstart project to dovetail 12th Street work, I don't think that required matching funding, did it? And I do know that John, we're doing, your staff is involved with this along with planning and other entities within the city to help us finalize that Jumpstart work. Sarah, did we have to get matching funds? I think we got $200,000 for them to do the Jumpstart work.
There is matching funds that we have to put into the 12th Street project.
And with those matching funds, what entity, is it us or Metro Plan, what entity actually monitors the spending and the amount of funding that we have left and how we move forward and utilize that funding? Because it has to be a thorough basis too. I think it's just not we get money and just spend it on what project you want to have and what projects the neighborhood associations or community folks want to have. It has to be some kind of thorough assessment on how we're utilizing these funding sources. So who monitors that? Is that something we do, Sarah, or is that something that Metro Plan does? Or how does that work when we have matching fund with these federal grant sources?
I can speak for our department and then maybe a little for, I don't want to speak too much for Sarah, but
Okay.
On a project like this, we monitor our funds. We know the rules that we have to follow when we're spending those dollars. All that information has to be turned over to the granting agency, and 12th Street, that in particular is Metro Plan. So they're the ones that are monitoring our spending. They approve our expenditures in order for us to either get, is that a reimbursable grant? I think that one's reimbursable, where we spend money and they reimburse us money back. So we submit to them our payments. They make sure we're spending it according to the grant requirements and the federal requirements that are tied to that money. And we move down the road that way. There's steps you go through in the process to be approved to move to the next step in the process.
So with respect to monitoring it sequentially in terms of outcomes, would we look to Metro Plan or Sarah in terms of identifying how much money remains in order for us to do the work that we claim we're going to do, or the work we are going to do?
Well, we take that responsibility on ourselves to make sure that we have enough money to do the project and stay within those limits. Metro Plan certainly observes that and makes sure that we're spending the money within the criteria that are set forth with the grant.
And our partnership with Metro Plan gives us a seat at the table to make sure that's done correctly.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Director Wyrick?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. John, on item number 5 again, you know, we've been talking about complete streets for quite a while. And have we actually built complete streets with bicycle paths and all that in a lot of locations in the city?
Yes, we have.
We have. Okay. And I've heard from time to time that we're not able to do complete streets because of one reason or another. Is this part of the plan you're trying to pull together, where when we build a street, if it's not feasible to do a bicycle plan, then it will be eliminated from the bicycle plan that's already in place?
Yes, ma'am. That's the impetus for us trying to get this grant to redo the plan.
Like, for instance, Stagecoach Road, you know, we were gonna widen that street and fill in gaps along there. It's one of those streets where it's wide and then it's little, then it's wide.
Yes, ma'am.
And the bicycle folks wanted us to put a bicycle lane in there, and we said we couldn't do it. So should that have been a complete street project?
According to the Complete Streets Ordinance, if it's designated in the master street plan and the bike master plan, which is in the master street plan, we're supposed to follow that plan when we're doing our road construction or resurfacing projects. So yes, according to Complete Streets, we have to have a good reason not to do it. So that's why we're trying to clean up those plans to create those corridors or pathways that we can do when we do these projects and eliminate those that we know are not feasible to actually do.
Okay, so are we going to coordinate these activities with Bicycle Friendly Group in regards to taking bicycles off the
Yes,
plans?
it's our plan to actually work with the entire community to do this plan. We'll be doing that in conjunction with the planning department, since technically the master street plan is a planning document.
Okay.
It affects us a lot in everything that we do. That's why we're sort of taking the reins on trying to rework this particular part of that plan. But yeah, we plan on having public forums where we'll be able to have input from everybody across the city, regardless if it's bicycles or not.
If we take a bicycle lane off of a street, are we looking to provide another direction when we do that, or are we just saying no bicycle lanes? I know I was looking at, I was hearing one of the people talk about the bicycle access along 65th Street and around through that area, and they were trying to pick their way through to find a bicycle path. Are we given alternatives to bicycling in cases where they don't fit with the master street plan?
That's what this plan, that's what we're going to try and get done with this revision
Okay.
to the plan is those corridors that we can't get through. We still want to have a way to do it in that area. It may not be on that exact street. We want to look at what are our other options to do that same thing, but maybe not on that exact street where we have issues of being able to construct.
That's good. I think they're spending a lot of time trying to pick their way through on city streets so they can have access from one place to another, so I think that'll work well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Hendricks?
John,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
need to ask you on 3 Woodson Road, is that out by the airport?
Oh,
Number 3.
I can't
I'm gonna
remember off,
domain.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I completely apologize.
Okay.
I'll look it up and
Yeah,
I'll
let's-
get back with you
Because I
before.
don't know, it may be on another Woodson Road somewhere else.
But let me look and I'll get back with
Okay,
you.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Adcock?
John, you said you had a list of those names.
Yes,
I would
ma'am.
like to have a copy of it,
Certainly, I'll
please.
get that for you.
And Woodson Road is off of 65th Street in Southwest Little Rock.
Okay, all right. Southwest, okay. 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 I just wanted to make sure there wasn't another question.
And we'll make sure, okay, Director Hendricks, so did we get your question? Okay. So we have 4 planning and development items, 7 through 10. Director Peck?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor. I'd like to hold separate item 9.
Item 9. Okay,
You want a presentation or just hold it separate?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Director Wyrick?
I'd like to hold separate item 8.
I'll ask that same question. Do you want a presentation or just hold it separate?
Hold it separate.
Okay. Item 11. Director Wright?
Can you go back to 10? Can I get a presentation on that? What is that?
Let me ask Mr. Collins to come forward.
Vice Mayor, members of the board. Director Wright, Scott, if you'll bring up the zoning plan. That property is located off of Lawson Road, and just a little bit south of Colonel Glenn. If you see part of it, the little red hashed area, part of it is within the city limits, and part of it is outside of the city limits. So also part of this process is they're going to have to annex in the rest of their property. What they're looking to do to rezone the property from a R2 single family, which is the general zoning that we bring in when we annex stuff into the county, and that's that portion that's within the city limits. They want to go to planned development commercial, A pest control office is what they're looking to put in on that. Scott, if you'll go to the sketch plan on there, kind of see what their layout is for the,
Looks like 7, but they got it down here 6. That's why I wanted to know, because that side is all you.
so what does it say?
We'll check.
Yeah,
We'll check
because-
with that, make
Because
sure
I
it's in the
think
right
that
one.
that side is BJ. I'm the opposite side that leads to Lake Nixon.
Okay. We'll verify that and make that change.
You can have it, BJ. You can have it.
So associated with the site plan is just general parking and general storage area and a warehouse that you're looking to put in. And then if you look at the area, Scott, if you go back to the zoning map of what's in that area, you'll see there's also planned commercial developments surrounding it. So that whole intersection is, changing to planned commercial.
Any neighborhood associations in that area?
We notified, not right adjacent to it, but our notifications went out for the 200 feet. And then we also notified Plantation Acres Property Association and Southwest United for Progress.
Yeah, that's BJ.
Yeah.
I think y'all got that listed wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I didn't see any questions on item 11, so we'll move to the financial report.
Let me ask our Financial Director, Sarah Linehan, to come forward.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, members of the board. This is the fourth quarter financial report. It'll have our year-end results. These are still unaudited results. Our auditors have completed field work, and we're working on our comprehensive annual financial report, which should be issued prior to the end of June. On the first slide, you'll see our revenues. Our final revenues came in at 99.81% of budget, so 0.19% below the amended budget. On the next slide, you'll see that we were $360,000 below the amended budget. Actual revenues were $193,689,741 in the general fund, compared to an amended budget of $194,049,884, and compared to $190,254,768 a year ago. Again, we were $360,000 below budget, but our revenues were $3.43 million above the same period a year ago. On the next slide, you'll see by category. And again, keep in mind, this is in comparison to the amended budget. So you'll recall that throughout the year we talked about our property taxes, where we had received the excess charge late in 2015, so we had to record that as a 2016 revenue. So when we were comparing 2017 to 2016, we had $900,000 and some more in revenue in 2016 than we normally would have. So we did come in slightly below on our property tax revenue, $126,000. $116,000 of that was a direct pass-through to our police and fire pension funds, so it did not really have an impact on what was available for general fund expenditure. The sales tax revenues came in 0.5% below budget. We were at $494,000 below budget. The miscellaneous revenues, that exceeded our budget estimate, and a part of that was an extra contribution that Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau made to help offset reduced revenue and excess expenses in the river market. Part of the agreement where they operate the river market is that we share in anything that misses the budget mark. So they made an extra contribution of about $103,000 at the end of the year. We also had some excess pension revenues that were included in that number. And specifically, there was about $147,000 from the sale of seized evidence that was passed through to the police pension fund in that miscellaneous category. The next slide is the one that Director Campuris had requested a few years ago, and this is just to compare our ending results to our original adopted budget prior to amendment. So you recall that we made a $2 million amendment to our revenues mid-year last year. Our actual revenues were almost $1.7 million above the original budget. It was an appropriate adjustment. All the categories were appropriate. It's just our sales tax revenues did not continue to come in at the rate we had hoped. So that was the main area where we saw a difference. On the next slide, slide 6, you'll see in comparison to the same period a year ago. So you'll see that while our sales tax revenues were short of the 2.2% budget projection we had made, they were still $1.7 million above the previous year budget. Our fines and fees and our utility franchise fees both trailed the budget. We made adjustments for that during the year. We've talked about kind of the trend in the fines and fees with the change in the probation and the minimum requirements for fines and just reduced number of tickets issued. Our investment income exceeded the prior year. It was a little bit short of the budget adjustment or amended budget just due to the fair market value adjustment that we make at the end of each year. The next slide, we'll move on to sales tax. So the December through February 18th, December 17th through February 18th sales tax results for October, November, and December have been added to this. In the month of October, our receipts were up 0.51%. They decreased 0.65% with February collections for November sales, and then they increased 1.79% in February for December sales. Year to date, the sales tax increased, the city portion of the sales tax increased 1.87%. The county sales tax portion was 1.68% growth, so the blended results were 1.71% for the year. Again, our amended budget was 2.2% growth. The next slide really shows that better, all the numbers that I just gave you. We'll move on to show by month how we trended through the year. I want to remind you that when we presented the budget amendment, when we began working on the budget amendment, our sales tax results were actually up 2.9%. When we made the amendment, we brought that down to an annual projection of 2.2%, thinking that we were being relatively conservative. But the last quarter of the year was just not favorable. And this is even with the slight bump that we had with adding the Amazon portion of their sales. So for the year, we ended up just under $500,000 shy of our amended budget, 0.49% below the 2.2% projection at $1 million or 1.71%. This does have an impact as well on the projection that we used for our 2018 budget, and so we'll be talking about that in the not too distant future. On our next slide, you'll see our revenue provided by the new sales tax, and this is since inception. During 2017, we brought in $31,367,000 that was dedicated to operations for things like filling all the vacant police positions, the additional parks and zoo funding for maintaining of the parks and zoos and that type of thing, code enforcement. The 3/8 capital expenditures fund, we brought in $18.8 million for a total of $50,187,000, which again was 1.87%. That's just local tax, so that was 1.87% above prior year. Life to date, the tax has generated $289,348,807 for capital and operating funds. Next, we'll talk about our franchise fees. Our electric franchise fees The original budget was $12,670,000, which was a 6.4% decrease from last year's actual results. By last year, I mean 2017, or 16. The amended annual budget was $13,203,000, which was 2.5% below the previous year's revenue, and the year-end results actually came in about $124,600 above that forecast. And that was primarily due to more favorable, well, colder weather in the fourth quarter. Depends on how you look at favorable. On the next slide, we have our gas revenues. Here at the beginning of the year, during the budget process, the gas company had projected that we would see 25.7% growth in revenues due to some rate changes and anticipating a more normal usage. During our budget amendment, we did decrease that and brought down the annual expectation to $2,828,000, which was 12% above the previous year's results. We fell just about $18,000 short of that with our updated actual revenues. On the revenue chart that we showed a little while ago, franchise fees did come in a little bit below budget. It was really not due to the two big ones, energy and gas. It really had more to do with our long distance, our telephone, cable. More people are moving to streaming services and aren't using some of the cable options and other options like that. And we've continued to see a decline in long distance and telephone and expect to continue that trend. The next slide is our expenditures. Here we expended 100.29% of our annual budget, so where we were short 0.19% on the revenue side, we were over 0.29% on the expenditure side, and I'll go into more detail on that in just a moment. On the next slide, you'll see that we expended $194,230,599. The expenditure budget was $193,672,575. These are our operating expenses, and that compares to $187,256,760 the same period a year ago. So we were about $558,000 above budget. We were $7 million above the same period a year ago. Now, a lot of that $7 million had to do with debt service on notes that we took out to accelerate 3/8 projects. It's not general operating expenses. It was related to debt service, and those notes roll off at the end of each 5-year period. On the next slide, this is the by category. So a positive number is a favorable variance, which means the expenditures were below the budget. Negative number is an unfavorable variance. The favorable variance in general government primarily had to do with our actuarially required OPEB contribution at the end of the year. OPEB is other post-employment benefits. So when you offer, you allow employees to participate in like health insurance or things like that from the point of retirement until they qualify for Social Security. And usually it's our police and fire that retire at an earlier age and take advantage of that. There's an implied benefit because they're able to enjoy the group rate that the city has. And so that's actuarially determined, and it came in lower than we anticipated, and that generated the majority of that favorable variance. The negative variances, River Market, line 15, that had to do with some personnel cost and also with the write-off of a bad debt, where we had someone who rented the pavilion, the River Market pavilion, and did not pay. And so we had to absorb that. But again, in the miscellaneous revenue, you'll recall that one of the reasons for the favorable variance was the additional contribution of $103,000 from LRCVB to help offset that. On the fire and police, that is almost entirely due to personnel costs. Fire, it was primarily associated with overtime incurred, and they have regular recruit schools to fill those vacancies, but those are vacancies that must be filled when they're absent. It requires overtime. The police had the mandatory overtime program in place. When we did the budget amendment, we stopped our vacancy savings charges. We had achieved our vacancy goal. We made an estimate of what vacancy savings would be for the remainder of the year and anticipated that that would offset most of that excess overtime. The overtime actually was a little bit more than what we anticipated, and then that third recruit school that started in November was a little bit earlier than I had anticipated. The good news, which we'll see on a future slide, is we did make a huge dent in our vacant positions in the police department. So the net impact was $558,000 over budget on expenditures. And again, the vast majority of that was public safety, offset by favorable variances in other departments. The next slide is a summary. So we talked about line 1, the revenues were below budget $360,000. Expenditures were over budget $558,000, which meant an overall negative variance of $918,000, just under $1 million. I wanted to show you the other financing sources and uses because our actual loss for the year is more than that, but it was planned. When we adopted the budget, original budget, we included $2.2 million in carryover funds, one-time money to balance the budget. Well, what generates that carryover is revenues generated in prior years. And normally that revenue automatically closes to fund balance. We had actually set aside $541,000 from the previous year net income in a special project that we transferred in to offset that. But that left $1.7 million that needed to come from the fund balance. The thing I want to make sure you understand is that, again, that was a planned utilization of prior year money. It did not in any way impact the $10 million restricted reserve that you have for emergencies. So the general fund balance at the end of the year was $20,598,678, which gives us some cash flow that's required because of the timing of revenues coming in and all of that, and also maintains that $10 million restricted reserve. The next slide is our vacancy report. And again, we had budgeted originally $7 million in vacancy savings. We had achieved that by the end of September. We only had 98 budgeted positions that were unfilled in the general fund at the end of the year. Our vacation and sick payouts for retiring employees was slightly over our original budget estimate. When you look at the next slide, you'll see the progress we've made. At the beginning of the year, we had 148 unbudgeted vacant positions or unfilled budgeted positions in the general fund. We ended the year with 98, and of that, our police officer positions that were included in that at the beginning of the year, there were 62 vacant positions in December 2016, and by December 2017, that number was down to 21. So that 40 position variance is the majority of that decline. And we did have 3 recruit schools last year in February, August, and November. That concludes the financial report for the general fund. The full audit, as I said, that includes all of the funds, will be coming out in June.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Linehan? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have item 13 is a discussion that we will have May 1st. Director Hendricks.
I wanted to make sure that each of you has a copy that I passed out to you before. If you need one, let Tom know. And I said to Mr. Moore, I expect to have a good conversation on this issue, just as we did with the word about Sabrin and Scott making money, okay? This is something that's going to impact us here. But it seems that it was a lot said about raising the funds, so I want to hear a lot said about this, which would save the city some money rather than going to court.
Thank you, Director Hendricks. I don't see any other lights on the board, so we will not be out of here quite as fast as Director Wyrick.
I just have one quick thing to say. I would like to add a presentation to next week's agenda. It'll be a quickie video of an event that's going to be happening at the airport, and I think it'll be fun for all of us to see. It might take about 4 or 5 minutes. How do I get it added as a presentation?
Just what's the title? I mean,
I don't want to tell you, because if I do, you'll know what it is. Just say airport presentation.
do we need to contact anybody, or are you going to do that?
I will contact, I got to get the video to someone, so who do I get the video to?
Scott.
Scott, okay. Scott, I will be sending you a little video for next week's meeting. It'll be fun, y'all will enjoy it, I promise.
So are you going to do the you're going to do the presentation?
Well, I tried to get Shane to come, and he asked me to do it, so.
Okay.
It'll be me. Very few words, mostly video.
Got it.
Thank you. Director Richardson?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Bruce, if the presentation is the impetus for any kind of legislation, it can't be added for 2 weeks. Is that correct?
I think that
Or was it
the
just
way
limited to ordinances?
the way I interpret your rules, or that's dealing with resolutions and ordinances.
So it can be, if it's not giving you a hard time, BJ, but if the presentation, no, I'm not. We talked all day on the phone yesterday. Chelsea, you didn't hear that. But if the presentation is the impetus of some kind of legislation, it can be added for 2 weeks. Am I correct on that, Tom? No, I'm not
Piece
talking
of
about yours.
legislation cannot be added without at least 2 weeks' notice
Okay,
by a
thank you.
board member by right.
Thank you, sir. And Director Hendricks, you want no discussion on yours until next week during the presentation, correct? And my question is the same one that Bruce asked BJ. Are you going to be the one doing the presentation?
She's turning me on.
You're on.
What do you mean a presentation?
On the item that you introduced on the agenda?
This is y'all's item. This ain't Irma's item. This is y'all's item, okay?
Thank you.
Okay,
And
thank
Director
you.
Hendricks, did you have another comment?
No. I'm just commenting to Ken. Somebody's boosted him up to play with me. He knows better than that.
Okay. Thank you. Then we're finished, and we will see everybody next Tuesday.